Hey, welcome everyone to the Critical Music Club number 5, the All-Rockin Roundtable, a chance for musicians, DJs, music writers, and miscellaneous miscreants to meet and talk tunes. My name is DJ Bo. No stops, no caps, no brags, just facts. Shanghai's number 2 DJ. Right now. Hello, Philip. Can you hear me? Before we kind of dive into the album a bit, I'll just talk to you a little bit, Philip. Let's just do a quick chat on where you were and the situation around the album, um, which I'm holding in my hands right here. I sing my songs for you. So, I mean, Philip, we've done hours and hours of interviews, right? Like we've done radio, we've done live events, we've done it all, right?
Yeah, we
So,
talked.
we've talked. So, just to get everyone context, you were playing coffee shops and doing the folk circuit with your partner Sherry. You by completely by chance you ended up at Muscle Shoals by fortuitously meeting someone. You started there as a staff songwriter. At what point did you know you were going to make an LP?
Uh, well, that was always the plan, to do it. But it wasn't until Torn Between Two Lovers was number one,
Hmm.
and I met I met a lawyer in Woodstock who was Stevie Wonder's lawyer and manager. His name is Johannes Vagoda, and I played in my songs. I was living in Woodstock by then, and he introduced me to Motown because he was Stevie's lawyer, right?
Hmm.
And it was all just very normal stuff. People who know each other do business with each other, and just was. It's really a matter of meeting the right person. I think it's a very personal thing for me, and it continues to be that way.
Hmm.
If I send my stuff off, I never hear anything back. Yeah, everything happens in a very personal way.
Hmm.
You know?
So let me ask you this: when you went into this LP, did they say we need "Torn Between Two Lovers" to be on there? We need a singer-songwriter effort, or is that just the direction that you were doing, or did you go into it with like a specific focus of what you wanted this to end up being, or is that what it just ended up being?
Pretty much what it ended up being. I mean, I was a staff writer in Muscle Shoals, so that's where I recorded it. I was used to working there, and I had friends there. I knew the guys, and so just call them and put it together. Basically, I called Jerry Masters first. Jerry was the studio engineer at Muscle Shoals Sound, where I was a staff writer and where Mary and Barry Beckett recorded Torn Between Two Lovers. Uh, again, just called up the people that I knew. I made the deal with Motown, and so I had a budget, and uh, and that was the only place I knew. So I called them up, and you know, we went in, and basically it was do whatever you want. I was the producer, so I could do whatever songs I wanted, and having Torn Between Two Lovers on the album was the only requirement.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and then and like you could say to some degree that you wanted the best session musicians possible on it, but you were at Muscle Shoals anyway, so that was kind of the default, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a choice of them, and uh it was a little bit of a scramble because when I was a staff writer, I was at Muscle Shoals Sound,
Hmm.
and Muscle Shoals Sound, there were four guys that were the main players. They were producers, and they were the owners of the studio. That was Barry Beckett, Roger Hawkins, David Hood, and Jimmy Johnson. So whenever I did my demos there, those guys were my band.
Hmm.
And so I went in, and
Yeah.
they all produced my writer sessions.
Hmm.
And then when I signed with Motown, the real snag to it was that Motown insisted to own my publishing, or they wanted to make a publishing deal with me, and I was a staff writer, which means that I wasn't free to sign a deal with Motown.
Mm.
And so and they didn't want to let me go. So I had to, make a deal, have a lawyer, uh, I had to buy my contract back. And so it was kind of messy because it was like, you need to do it now. And everybody was really busy, and I had to really push them to get it done. And then it ended up just getting done between lawyers, which left our relationship in a not so great place.
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
And I don't know why, because it was a great deal for them. They made a great deal. And I paid them money to get out of the contract, and I signed with Motown. It was very straightforward. But the way that it happened, so those guys didn't play with me on my first album. And that was my plan, and my dream was that I was going to, of course, be working with the guys that I knew, that I'd been working with, right? And it just didn't work out. So all the guys that played with me were kind of the second string guys who I had also worked with most of them. And Jerry, the engineer, was from Muscle Shoals Sound. He was the first string engineer guy, and he came over with me, and we actually cut it in another studio there. There were a number of great studios and a lot of great players.
mhm,
But it was kind of weird, and the whole thing was done within 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. I can't remember exactly,
mhm,
but they were all songs that were already written, and we had already done demos. And I had done demos at Muscle Shoals Sound with those guys, but part of the deal was that I wasn't to use those demos. I had to recut that stuff again.
mhm.
Yeah, so
Uh,
that's
I
that's
have
how. Yeah.
I have a
And
question. What was the cost of you buying out of your contract?
Yeah, what it was a deal. Yeah, what's more interesting in a way is that when I signed there, I was just a music, I had never signed a deal with any professional publisher or record company or anything. I had been playing 6 nights a week in clubs, right?
mhm,
And I didn't know anything about the real music business. So when I started there, basically for the first year, I just recorded I never got paid anything, right? I was a staff writer. I recorded my songs. I went in the studio. Those guys played with me. It was all free. It was amazing. And so the deal was, well, when you get something out, you'll make some money. And in the second year, they started paying me $100 a month, like a
What?
just yeah, I don't know. Yeah. But Torn Between Two Lovers had still not come out yet.
Hmm.
And so by the time it took almost a year after it was written before it did get out, and before it became number one, right?
mhm,
It didn't happen in a minute. So when it did happen, and then after, I had been down there a few times. Anyway, to get up to the question, uh, I actually had to pay them $25,000 to get out of my contract, which they had never paid me. They had paid me by that time maybe $500, or you know,
mhm,
$100 a month, right? And so I had to agree to pay that, and the reason I could do that was Motown was paying me more,
mhm,
and I had to sign that, right? And so they agreed to accept the first $25,000 of Torn Between Two Lovers money, which takes time, like for BMI to collect that money, and for royalties, it
Hmm.
takes time. So that money wasn't coming for 6 months or 9 months or 12 months or whatever. Anyway, and so I agreed, and they owned the publishing of that.
mhm,
And so I got it's like cut into fourths because there were 2 writers and 2 publishers. So my 25% out of that part, I agreed to give them the first $25,000, which should have come to me. All right. But by doing that, I immediately signed with Motown, was paid $25,000 advance, which went into my pocket, and a budget to go in and make my album. So it was, it was just business. And, like I said, my lawyer was Stevie Wonder's lawyer. He knew how to deal with it. And, it, it, it wasn't my first choice of the way to do things, but there was like a time frame, like, hey, if you want to do this, you've got to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I wasn't able to really finesse it the way that I wish I could have remained best friends with the guys that I did, that I got started with. I always, really, that was one thing I was sorry about.
Yeah, that is too bad. But and I bet there was just this sort of intense pressure. You kind of referred to it of you have a #1 song on the radio, get your stuff out now and capitalize on it, right?
Right. Somebody, they offered me a 10 album deal at Motown. So it wasn't, my contract was actually 2 albums a year for 5 years. And that was a guaranteed contract.
Mhm.
So it wasn't something I could just, think, well, I'll just sit around and think about this, right?
No.
So
Yeah, because that was gonna be my question, was like how guaranteed was that income? Because that's it. I mean, I just looked it up, and like what, 25,000 in back then, I guess, or whatever, is like, that's a lot of money.
It was okay. And, the budgets were quite good for the making records in those days also. And so, and that was just an advance, right? That was like, they did a co-publishing deal. So I owned half of my publishing, which I didn't own at Muscle Shoals. I didn't own any. I was just a staff writer. But with Motown, I owned 50% of my publishing. It was a partnership, and the 25,000 was just an advance, which once they got, again, the first 25,000 that came to me would go to them, and they would get their money back.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
But it was a good thing, and it was to make 2 albums a year, which is that's a lot of songs.
yeah. And you did end up putting out more albums. I have them here. Although, Motown changed ownership and then we're getting into later parts of your career. But to focus back on I Sing My Songs for You, let's talk about some of the musicians on here. And they are really, even if they weren't your first pick, there's some amazing people here. Can you touch on them? I'll name a couple and you can choose. First of all, the Muscle Shoals Horn Section, which has been on huge hit songs by all sorts of people. Larry Byram, who was in Steppenwolf and played guitar on all sorts of recordings. Roger Clark, Jimmy Bebop Evans, Tim Henson, Bob Ray on bass. Can you talk a little bit about these guys?
Well, they were all amazing. Now, actually, when I listen to that album, it sounds better now than it did then. And I mean, what those guys were playing, it's really wonderful. And just listen to the bass lines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, from my point of view, what they were playing to my songs was amazing, right? I mean, you guys are a lot of musicians, and you know how hard it is to sit down with other musicians and get a song to sound like you want it to sound, or without people playing all over your thing, and that these guys are so talented. I mean, within, I could sit down and play it once or twice and they had it. They would write their own chart, and that's how they work, right? Nobody tells them how to play. We just go in and they know how to do that. And usually the keyboard player would write out just a number chart, and it would just be, instead of chords, right, it would be 1, 4, and 5, and somebody would write it out, and then everybody would play, and then we would record it and go and talk about, oh, what about that part, and somebody would want to overdub their part or something. But when I go back and you listen to the intricate bass lines and how they made that work, you know, I I'm amazed today.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So
So
just
I mean, to talk about the guys, the horn players had just come off tour with Elton John at the moment, and Elton John was pretty hot in the 70s, and they were playing with all the R&B. They became, I guess, most well known for the R&B artists that came in there, and I think the Muscle Shoals horn section was probably as well known as anything for Muscle Shoals. Larry Byram, the guitar player, was amazing, great. You still haven't heard the punk things, but he actually played with me on I think on all of my sessions through all of those albums that I did down there, into this like rock and roll punk stuff that I got into by the end of the 70s. And I mean, it's just amazing stuff he could play. And he played with tons and tons of people, but being part of Steppenwolf is kind of a feather that I look up to. And the drummer, Roger, was with Stevie, what's his name? Fly Like an Eagle, da-da-da.
Steve Miller Band.
Steve Miller.
He was with Steve Miller Band. And actually, the bass player, I think the bass player is still down there.
Wow.
I can imagine how many gold records he's played on in 50 years of being.
Well, I was just looking that up. Bob Ray has played with Hank Williams Jr., Mac Davis, Travis Womack, Bobby Hatfield, ZZ Hill, The Osmonds, Clarence Carter, Lee Greenwood. So he's, sold a zillion records.
Yeah, those guys were there when I was there. I mean, things like Mac Davis and the Osmonds, and that was the hot period. But he's done everything since then, right? Yeah.
So I want to just touch on two quick things, and then we'll open it up and talk about some of the songs and get some discussion going. One, because I've talked with you a bunch, I know you had a very fun experience for your album launch party in Los Angeles, right?
Yes, that was that one. Exactly that one.
Can you tell people about just the album launch party?
Well, I was trying to remember. It was at. Do you remember which club it was at?
Was it the Whiskey Go Go or the Rainbow or one of those major ones in LA, right?
I can't remember off the top of my head. It just, I've got the picture. I have to read the caption to remember, but it was one of those places. And it was a Motown launch. So another Motown band played also. There were two of us, and all the Motown people were there. Mary McGregor came by, and we had a few, pictures together, and, it was written up in the Hollywood Reporter kind of thing. It was the place where everybody, had their opening night kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think Elton John played there, or Queen played there.
The Troubadour?
Troubadour, yeah, Troubadour.
That would make sense. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is when Motown had moved to Los Angeles, right?
Sure, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so one last thing. So the album, you have the party, it's released. Did the album, both in the sound and in the sales, or how the public took it, did it meet your expectations? Was it different than you expected? How did you feel?
Interesting question. It all happened so fast, and I was in the studio working on the next. It was just one thing after the other for about 5 years there. But for the 3-year period after I signed with Motown, I almost never saw the sun. Yeah, I never knew what season it was. I was in the studio, or I was in a plane to go play a show, and back again on Monday to the studio. It was a big blur. And I would do some things at radio stations. I would open shows I would just go with an acoustic guitar and open some show for a college, or it would be like 2,000 seats, 5,000 seats kind of thing, and do some performance at radio. There would be like a live radio, and I would play, and people would come by the radio. I would be in like Tennessee someplace, right? It was just like, but so far as the anything really happening with this record, I sort of felt like Motown did not know what to do with it, right? They had all of this Motown artists, which they had relationships with those kinds of radio stations, which is totally different from my record. And so they didn't really get anywhere with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was making the second album, and the second album also was basic tracks at Muscle Shoals, and then all the overdubbing was in NLA, and it was much more symphonic. We put the LA Symphony is playing on it. It was like before synthesizer strings and before everything became, synthesizer, whatever that happened in the 80s, right? This was the end of real orchestral sessions. And that the guy who did the strings, he did all the strings for Peter Asher. He arranged the strings for Torn Between Two Lovers. And David Campbell is his name. He did like all the James Taylor, Linda Ronstadt, Peter Asher projects, and he's still out there. I just reconnected with him recently. This is a guy to look up. Yeah, he's got a website, but you just like look at, you will see him with McCartney, with George Harrison, with everybody, right? He is an amazing talent. And so that second album was supposed to be for Motown, and I had a 10-album deal.
Gotcha.
But I felt like they didn't really know what to do with it. So I sort of really got more into production rather than just it's a singer-songwriter kind of thing, but rather it was a band thing, lots of backup singers, and it was a big production, which I learned to do as I went along.
Yeah.
And
so, I mean, just to show everyone, if you didn't see, this is the cover of the first LP right here, if you can see. So very singer-songwriter-ish, and then we get to the second one, and boom, we've hit the darkness a bit.
it's not. It was just a progression of everything, and actually, that the cover was more fit for the third album. It's more punk looking, but everything happened in moods. That's also not the punk album. That was the third album never came out.
Okay.
And that one is like a conglomerate, of just a bunch of songs that were thrown together. But the second album was supposed to be with Motown, and because I felt like they didn't really know what to do with me, and by that time the thrill of being a white guy at Motown had worn off, I was still. It actually wasn't even until the third album. Stevie Wonder's engineer mixed that second album. So I started working with Stevie's people in the studio. And that's Malcolm Cecil, who has the Grammy for Superstition and 4 Stevie Wonder albums. And he mixed that second album. And then when we started the third album, we started in his studio with a song called Poison, which I've just recently, in the last year, finally released.
Cool. Okay, so we're gonna focus on I Sing My Songs for You. I could go on asking things, but let's open it up to people. Do you guys have questions for Philip or comments you want to make about the albums, and I could also play snippets of the songs here from my computer. But someone take it away.
I have one. A 10 album deal with Motown for this seems, was that a common contract that you would sign back in the day?
Not really. It was really a superstar deal. It was also a superstar percentage that I was to get. It was very equal to a Diana Ross contract, and she had been there with a lot of hits for a long time. So
Right.
it was due to the. I mean, Torn Between Two Lovers was pretty massive, and it had to do with that, and it had to do with the fact that Stevie Wonder's lawyer was my lawyer. And Stevie had just he had just put out Songs in the Key of Life,
I see.
and yeah, their it was a court case, and they won like $13 million advance for Stevie for like back money and for advance for that album, which was the biggest that had ever happened at that moment. Was a $13 million advance, a payment or whatever. I mean, a lot of that was just money that he had never been paid for hits that he had made through the years. But the lawyer that made that deal carried a lot of weight around Motown at that moment. So he was able to make that kind of a deal.
Cool. Anyone else, especially on the content, the music of the album?
I had a question about like the songwriting process. I mean, like you say, two albums a year. There's a lot of songs. How do you go about writing so many songs? Did it come easy for you at the time, or?
Yeah, it was quite easy. I mean, it was something that I've always done, and I started writing songs when I was about 13, and I just always did that. And once I signed, I always wrote songs, and I was making demos before I met the people at Muscle Shoals. So when they signed me, I was ready. I mean, one of the things Barry Beckett, who was the guy who actually signed me, he listened to all my demos, and he said, I think you're getting ready to write a hit. He said, I don't think you have one yet, but I think you're getting ready to write one. And and so he signed me there. And then when people would come in, he would say, Rod Stewart's coming. Give me 3 songs for Rod Stewart. And I would write 3 or 4 or 5 songs and go and make demos, and then they would play it for the artists when they came in. And I kept pencil and paper in every room and guitars in every room, and I had a little recorder, and that's all I did. And you can do it wherever you are, and everything that happens is a song. I was writing all the time, day and night. Everything was a song to me.
Fantastic. I'm going to play a little bit of what I think is my favorite song from the album, and it was also a single. And hopefully this audio is going to work okay. Let me play a little bit of it, and let's talk about this song a bit.
Darkness always follows the day. Pain seems to last such a long time. Pleasures swiftly slip away. Your cold face is like a flaming switchblade.
So I'm fading out a bit. That's I'm Dying. And I think that's my favorite song from the album. It's a very dark song, which is an interesting contradiction because it was also the single. So why did Motown or why did you choose that for a single? And can you talk a little bit about that song? I know it's one you're very proud of.
Well, it was actually Vagoda's favorite song, and I guess everybody agreed they thought it was a really great song. So, um, that's how it got to be the single. They cut it down and made it shorter. It's like about 5 minutes long or something. And the single is actually, I don't know what was cut out. I can't remember. Probably cut the violin because there's a lot of violin in it. It's still one of my favorite songs, and I still play it.
Mhm.
I play it when I do live shows now, and I replace the violin with an erhu, you know, uh, playing here in China, and I really one of my things, my goal. I love replacing things with Chinese instruments, so it's a real cross cultural kind of a thing, and that song really lends itself to that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I just did a theater thing that was like about the Four Seasons, and so this was the song that represented winter.
Mhm.
And it was a theater show, and the storyline was that Shakespeare meets some famous Chinese poet from history
Mhm.
in a dream in a tea house,
Mhm.
and they were reading Shakespeare in English, and then they read Chinese poetry from 1,000 years ago, and I sang, and I was Shakespeare, but I sang, "I'm dying."
Uh-huh.
Right? I sang 4 of my songs was mixed in, so
It's a
just
beautiful
the
song.
idea, yeah,
It's a beautiful
it's pretty.
song, but for a single, it's also very dark, even just from the title, I'm Dying. But it's also just my favorite, so maybe it just makes sense in that regard.
Yeah, I'm dying from loving you. You have to say the whole thing.
Oh, well, it just says it. I got you. But on the
It's a
album,
little more commercial when you say the whole thing.
but on the album cover, it just says I'm dying. That's all
Yeah,
it
it's
says.
true.
Maybe it would have helped if it was like that. Uh, Ray, your music that you make is the closest to what Phillip does on this album. You do singer, songwriter, acoustic. You also do band shows as well, though. What did you think about the album, or what struck you about it?
I really loved it actually. There's a lot of really great music written. It's very it sounds to me very nostalgic. I get like the Glenn Campbell, Cat Stevens, George Harrison kind of vibes from a lot of the music, and um it surprised me how great the lyrics are. There's so many great songs with the really great lyrics that are just, like very quippy, and like sometimes it's like funny or kind of heartbreaking. And I really think it's really well written, well produced. Lots of great accompaniment with you, and the songs that you're playing. It's really perfect. I really like it. Um, Personally, I think it's really great. I really like it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Hmm.
I don't want to take up too much of Philip's times, and we've got other stuff to cover as well. Is there another question or two for Philip?
I
Yeah,
have
I
a
got
question.
one. Oh, go ahead.
Chachi,
Okay.
let someone else get a chance.
Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
I
No, no, no,
also
no.
okay. I also really enjoyed the album, Philip. I'm an amateur musician and I would like to start writing songs. And I'm wondering how you learned to write songs.
Again, it's just something that I always did. I didn't really study it. I basically just love music, and I didn't think too much. I mean, once I started working with the publishing company, then they uh, insisted on more structure, and sort of taught me, that so long ago, about 4 or 8 bar intros and 8 bar verses, and kind of that sort of hit structure, which just happens to work perfectly well. And, you know, every time I get out of that, I went through this phase where I kind of rebelling against it and trying to create my own thing or whatever, but I always come back to it, you know. And
Do you
even songs like I'm Dying, I would always have one song on the album where I had a totally creative middle section. So there's probably, I don't know exactly, but probably 16 bars of whatever was going to happen in the middle. That would be a journey. So that's how the violin thing got such a long, you know, that it was kind of it was for sure not supposed to be the single. It was, I don't know, you can see how long it is, but I'm guessing it's 5 minutes or more.
It's almost exactly 5 minutes here, but on the single it is shorter. I have the 45, just not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it would almost always turn out that that would be the song everybody would love the most because it would be the most interesting. But in order to be a single, it would have to be cut down.
Right. Kevin, you were about to say something?
Oh, well, I was going to ask, do you start with some sort of melodic hook, or do you start with some words that have an emotion that you try to put to a melody? Do you start with melody, chords, or words?
All of the above over the years. But in those days, I would start with what I would think was a hook idea. You know, and then build the song around that. And for example, like I'm dying, what was the chorus, right? And then it would be more on the next one. For example, a song called "Shock the World with Love." And so I would start with the idea of shock the world with love, you know, and then figure out how am I going to get there. And I would probably come up with a melody. How am I going to sing that line? And so that would be the chorus that I would build the whole song around. Because if you've got a great chorus, you've got a hit, right? And then you just need to kind of fill in how to get there and how to make a story of it and where's that all going. And I would never know. I would never know what the storyline was, right? I'm still to this day, if I say, oh, I'm going to write a story about a cat, it'll be a totally boring song. It'll be so stock because you know what you're going to say, so you'll just say it, right? But if you don't know what you're going to say and you're thinking, I'm going to write a song called Shock the World with Love, and the idea was that every day you get up and read some horrible crap. You look at some buildings blow up or it's like shock the world with shit every day. It's just awful. And the news is shocking, awful, bad news, right? So I had this idea about what if we shocked the world with love? What if we turned it around and did something amazing, great, and it was front page news, right? And so with that idea, I took off on the journey to write Shock the World with Love, right?
That's interesting, though. Oh, sorry, continue.
No, I was going to just give you another example, like Life's Got to Get Better, which is a song that I have also just released in the last year. Life's Got to Get Better. And I would try to make it kind of a positive thing, but then the next line was, it just can't get no worse, right? So the thing is, you get an idea, and then how are you going to twist that and make it interesting or say it in a way that nobody's ever said it before? Or how are you going to add, you know, I mean, and this is still the struggle today. I'm actually still writing some new songs that I think are the best things I've ever written. And they're like puzzles. There are actually songs that I started in the 70s that I still can't finish because I have the hit hook. I know it's amazing, great, but I can't make the masterpiece by fitting all the pieces together. And I
found a lot
here. Yeah,
I found a lot of the songs that are on this album to be you were saying stories, but you know I found my interpretation was like short stories about single images or short stories about single situations.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't get that impression at all. To me, this album works as a concept album of sorts, which I wanted to ask you about the sequencing of it. So I even wrote some notes here. So I can see this whole album as a story, one sort of narrative. This is how I kind of saw it. Phillip Jarrell, on track number 1, Till I Found You, you find one person, but on track 2, Wings of Time, time passes, and this person that you found, she's from Woodstock on track 3. Um, but things go a little fast. You party a little too hard on song number 4, Too Many Saturday Nights. And after you've done these extremes, you exhausted yourself. You're close to death on I'm Dying. But then you go to New York City, where you find yourself again with a Manhattan lady. That's track 6. But now you're torn between the Woodstock woman and the Manhattan lady. That's number 7. Um,
Amazing.
but this Manhattan woman is very beautiful. She's a pretty lady. That's track number 9. So you decide to stick with her. You drop the Woodstock woman, and now it's only her, aka only you. Track number 10. And I gotta say, the word "you" bookends the album. Till I Found You, track number 1, and track number 10, only you. So, boom, boom. How's my theory, Philip?
Amazing how you can rewrite history and that sometime down the line in future.
Rock opera.
Mm.
There you go. Let's ask one more question for Philip. He's been very generous with his time, and then we'll get to some other stuff. Who wants to cap us
Chachi had a
off?
question, huh?
Chachi?
Oh, sure. Yeah. First off, thanks so much for having this talk with us. This is super interesting. Um, so how old were you when you went to LA from Alabama?
I'm trying to remember actually when that happened. I think I was about 23.
Okay. And the reason I ask is, so I mean, before you moved, I mean, of course, at that time, everybody knew who Motown was, right? And so I really love the album. This is actually the first time I ever heard it. And it really reminded me of a lot of just LA in general. I don't know how much of that album was conceived in LA, but it really felt like LA. Like it sounded like Love and it sounded like Todd Rundgren and, that kind of vibe. Um, but when you were approached to make an album with Motown, did you have any other offers with companies that could probably handle the genre of music that you're playing a little more, you know, they probably had the target audience under their wing already?
Well, I don't really remember. I had one of the things that happened. This is a little story. It takes a minute to tell you.
Go for it.
One of the, I had written "Torn Between Two Lovers" with Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Hmm.
And Peter Yarrow, they were managed by Albert Grossman. And Albert managed Bob Dylan and Todd Rundgren and Paul Butterfield and owned Bearsville Records. Okay. So Peter calls Albert and says, "You need to meet Philip." And everybody said to me, "You need to meet Albert." So they called and made an appointment basically. And Albert called me and, I found my way to Woodstock. And I wanted to work with Albert. And that was sort of in the works, which would have been a much better thing for me to do. And after he basically had listened to the songs and he had said, "You're a great songwriter, but who's Philip? You need to be an artist, right? The artists, the people who we sign at Bearsville Records, they're like Bob Dylan, right? They're artists." And I was like a staff songwriter. I wrote songs for whoever needed a song. And the idea of me being an artist was a whole new, like nobody had ever said that to me before. Right. So he said, work on it and, let's get to know each other. This is going to take some time. And within the next year, Torn Between Two Lovers came out. And right after Torn Between Two Lovers came out, I went to see Albert. And Albert said, okay, I played him some new songs. And he said, I think it's good. And, you need to get a producer. And he didn't have a budget at the moment. It was the end of the season or whatever for Bearsville Records. So he called United Artists. And he was friends with people. So he called the president of United Artists and said, I think Phillip should get a chance to make it something. Like, why don't you give him $10,000 to make a single? And Phillip, why don't you go get yourself a producer and let's see what happens? And that happened. And that was in the works. I was thinking, okay, who could be the producer and how we can do it. And then within a week or so, I met this guy, Vagoda. And Vagoda said to me, give me 10 days and don't do anything. All right. Give me 10 days to make you a deal. And and it was like that. All of a sudden it was time. And then, he said, give me 10 days. And he called me about 5 days later and said, I need 10 more days. And about 2 days later was Friday. He said, the president of Motown's going to call you and he wants you to come out here on Monday. And would you make an album? Would you do a 10 album deal for Motown? It was like, I couldn't breathe, right? I was sitting in the floor going, and, so that basically answers your question. And when that really came into play was when I signed the next album was with 20th Century Fox. And I actually which made a lot of sense. And they actually gave me a better deal. So the second album was bought back from Motown and moved to 20th Century Fox. But at that moment, I actually had offers from RCA and also, I think, United Artists. There were 3 different record companies, and 20th Century Fox had the best deal. And they really wanted to break that record. So that's why to sign with them.
Oh, okay. Well, Phillip has been very generous with this time. Everyone give him a round of applause for joining us. Thank you very much. And I'm playing in the background a single he released last year, Life Has Got to Get Better, one of my favorite songs from last year. And Phillip, can you just mention a little bit of what you're working on, or if you want to plug anything, whatever you'd like to do?
Well, this last year has been great that I finally released some of these songs because of the lockdown thing, right? All I could do, I'm locked down in my apartment, is I had some DAT tapes and I went back and remastered some of these songs that never came out. And Life's Gotta Get Better is one of them. And another song called Poison. And when I went back to look at who was playing and write the credits down, it's been an amazing journey to see who was playing on that stuff with me. And a few of them are still around, but some of them didn't make it. And also, in this last year, I'm actually involved in writing some new project, and it's sort of in the process of being part of a new band, which is an unbelievable, amazing project. It's actually a Warner Brothers project, and the band is amazing. I mean, the people are amazing, and because the whole thing is not signed yet, I can't tell you what I would love to tell you, but I just tell you, hey, life goes on,
Well,
Gets better.
Life is gonna get better. Excellent. Well, Phillip,
but right now I'm in lockdown like everybody else, and I can't get to the session.